trying to do this video. And when I tried to upload it earlier, effectively the sound cut off just when I was getting into stuff. I was trying to upload a pre recorded version. So I figured the only real way through is live. So we're going to face whatever opposition there is in getting this message out there together. And we're going to share the word that needs to be shared. Now, for those of you who are new to me, or those of you who have been, you maybe a friend shared this video to you or something, just as a by way of introduction, my name is Dr. Bhairavi. I have a PhD in political science, but instead of going further into academia, I chose to take the path of spirituality. And what that meant was doing years and years of comparative religious studies, looking into different parts of faith, different histories of faith, and really going to many different parts of the world to pay respects to these different faiths and to go on various pilgrimages. So, my perspective on what I'm going to talk about today comes from both the viewpoint of a spiritualist, but also one who has been trained in political science. So, having said that, let's get into the subject matter. Take two. Today, we are going to be looking into Israeli-Gaza war. And I know it's a very polarizing subject. I know some of you may not like the fact I'm talking about it. Some of you may be disappointed that I don't share your point of view, and all of that is okay. My role here is to present a balanced way of seeing things. Your conclusions in response to that are your own, and I don't have any control or claim over that. So I will share with you what I know, and you come to your own conclusions. So for me, if someone were to ask what is my personal position, what is my personal opinion, I do not side with Israel. I do not side with Palestine. I do not side with anyone who sees children as acceptable collateral. That is not a part of what I see as good governance at any level of being. And that is certainly not what I would see as a moral or spiritual cost that is acceptable. And one of the reasons I'm doing this video is I was asked to do this by various members of the community. They wanted to know, why am I not speaking out? What is my view? How do I deal with people who come into this situation bringing in their own perceptions and dealing with the matter with a lot of vitriol? So I'm going to do my best to address all of these questions in as fair a way as I can provide. So, but that being said, this is my view. You will, of course, have your own. So, and if there are any issues with the sound, let me know. Okay, so let's look at the conflict itself. We have what is recognized as a nation state that is pitted against a population that is not recognized as a nation state. And that population has been under blockade for a very, very long time in what has been called the world's largest open air prison. And of course, they have their own political parties, but they also have their own extremists in that political party. So after years and years and years of conflict, what we eventually see, hang on, and of course Joshua wants to have a say in this. Um, I have a lot of love for the Jewish faith. And that is why there's a Joshua and an Ariel in my house. So I hope that is enough evidence that I am not an anti-Semite by having this position. But the fact is that we are seeing a very uneven and unequal conflict that has escalated into war. And this is not the first time it's done it. This has been going on for decades. And I don't have the scope to review everything that has happened and the why that it has happened. All I can do is to provide some context as to what has happened and how we can better use those key facts to come up with our own perceptions and our own ways of seeing things. So, for me, the starting point is to recognize that to criticize Israel is not the same as being anti Semitic. And a lot of people are afraid to voice their opinions because they don't want to be seen as anti Semitic, because that then morally equates you to Nazi Germany. But let me quote, and this is a very powerful quote that I found by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So these are not people who denied the Holocaust, rather, they are making sure it is remembered. And they adopted the following non legally binding working definition of anti Semitism. Anti Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And then they go on to say manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. However, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti Semitic. And what that means in English, in plain English, is to say that Jews do not get a free pass when committing crimes just because they are Jewish. That's not what that means. Anti Semitism is looking at someone and calling them the devil, calling them greedy, calling them a conspirator or whatever shadow government figure just because they are Jewish. It is a different way of expressing a commitment against ethnic and racial prejudice. That's what anti Semitism is. It does not mean giving them a free pass to commit acts of war. So if you were to look at the images that have come out of Gaza, you see babies who are burnt because they are using white phosphorus in their attacks, and that is an international war crime. Calling that out does not make me anti Semitic. It means that I want them to be held to the rule of law. And that is something that should apply, irrespective of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, or caste. And that is my position on this. So, for point number one, calling out the bullshit is not wrong. And anyone who tells you you are anti Semitic for taking this position is abusing a concept that was meant to protect the genuinely vulnerable through one of the worst atrocities in human history. But right now, it is being used to shield people. It is being used to shield people who are harming millions of innocents. So that is my first position. Now, am I going to deny the fact that Hamas attacked an Israeli music festival and 1,000 Israelis died, 14 of whom are children? Of course, I'm not going to deny that. That is horrible. The people involved need to be held to account. That does not mean targeting 2 million human beings who live in a very, very, very small territory. And this is the problem. People are unable to differentiate between ethnicity and extreme fringes of whichever ethnic group is responsible for whatever types of acts of violence that are happening. So, by all means, condemn Israel for its treatment of the Palestinians and condemn Hamas for its act of violence. You need to condemn both because both sides have killed innocents. Both sides have caused the deaths of children. But let us not play at moral equivalence here. This recent attack claimed the lives of 14 Israeli children. However, as per verifiable statistics by observer organizations, such as the Human Rights Watch, such as Amnesty International, such as the Norwegian Refugee Council, when you look at verified statistics, you see that 2,300 Palestinian children were killed in the past 20 years. Recorded facts. And that number has been exceeded in the past week. So let's not do a moral equivalence here at all. Dead babies on either side is unacceptable. However, Israel is getting the media coverage. It is also spinning the story in such a way that the other side just looks like a bunch of demons and monsters. And that is the same kind of rhetoric that has been used against the Jews for hundreds and hundreds of years. They are recycling it except with a different role right now. And all of this is verifiable by fact. Nothing I say here is a matter of opinion unless I very clearly say it's a matter of opinion. This is all verifiable with documented evidence. So that's point number one. To talk about this, we must not be afraid of that label. If you are calling out injustice, then call it out. Otherwise, forget being on the spiritual path. Go off and do something else. Point number one. Point number two, let's look at the roots of anti-Semitism. Now, these people have been scapegoated. They have been persecuted for thousands of years by various different ethnic groups. And I have a deep love for Jewish culture, Jewish history, and aspects of their spirituality. Okay, I am not coming at this as someone who thinks that they are an other that need to be, that need to be demonized in some way. No, I am not coming from that position. But effectively, this is a time where, how do I put this? We need to look at that history, we need to acknowledge that history, and we need to also see how it has created cycles of generational trauma that have led to terrible, terrible outcomes. The roots of anti Semitism are far, far, far older than what anyone can conceive of. This goes back thousands of years. And unfortunately, and this is where I find the United States to be a moral hypocrite, you can find it in the United States up till the 1960s. The earliest recorded governmental instance of anti Semitism in the United States came in the time of the Civil War, where Ulysses S. Grant wanted to oust Jews from their territory. And effectively, this order was rescinded by President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. But that was not a one off. You actually found key governmental figures all the way up till the 1960s and very, very prominent public personalities such as Henry Ford, who continued to espouse anti Semitic views. In fact, during the Holocaust, America did not do what it should have done to intervene. There were 100 to 200,000 Jews. That was an estimate, it's a broad estimate, but still a large number of people who were denied access to freedom, to safety, because of the bureaucratic red tape that was placed by the American government. And so it stands on anti Semitism being a bad thing. That is a recent phenomenon. So why did the attitude change? Well, a lot of that came due to the fact that by the 60s, we effectively saw the creation of a nation state of Israel. And in creation of that nation state, the United States found an ally, a very, very powerful ally in the Middle East. And effectively, with that ally, it felt that it would have a bargaining chip to also maintain peace in that region. That was one factor. Geopolitical interests. It needed an ally against the Soviets during the Cold War. But there was a second factor why public opinion also changed. Now, this is what I mentioned in the thumbnail for this piece called, and I want to make sure I get the name right. It is a document that was issued by the Catholic Church called Nostra Aetate. And see, up till that point, Christianity had a very conflictual relationship with Judaism. They did not see them as brothers, they did not see them holding hand in hand, they were not politically supportive of them. As early as the second century BC, we saw early Christians actually find reasons to be anti-Semitic. And one of the key reasons was that they accused the Jews of being responsible for the death of Jesus. So much so the Catholic Church has been trying to, calm this particular flame for a very long time. They tried issuing a catechism in the mid-16th century, which basically still said, no, it was the collectivity of sinful humanity that was responsible for the death of Jesus, not the Jews. See, mid-16th century, the church already said this, but it continued, and it kept going on, all the way through World War I, all the way through World War II, till finally in the 60s, they had another conversation, and here the Second Vatican Council, under Pope Paul VI, issued the declaration called Nostra Aetate. And this declaration repudiated the idea of a collective multi-generational Jewish guilt for the crucifixion of Jesus. It declared that the accusation could not be made against all the Jews without distinction. Then a anti-Semitic attitude was still very much a point of contestation in the United States in the 1960s. And from that point onwards, that's when the whole buddy-buddy system started. So whatever moral high horse people in the US are taking right now, they are doing it because they're forgetting their own history. And the fact that they did abandon Jewish Americans and Jews all over the world in their time of need during World War II. Again, this is documented. This ain't a conspiracy story. This is right there. There are governmental reports that actually deal with this question. Just look it up. Take the time and look it up. So, okay, then we see, right, there's a sea change in attitudes. Part of it is geopolitics, part of it is religious doctrine taking a different line, and eventually this becomes a very military and economic relationship between the US and Israel, which of course makes its way into politics. It is political suicide for any major political party to say anything less than complete acquiescence to what Israel is doing, whether or not it meets their own standards, whether or not it meets American standards of what democratic rule is, or whether or not it meets the standards of human rights international bodies. None of that matters as long as that relationship is kept key. And that is toxic. There's no point calling yourself a democracy if you're actually not going to call out other so called democracies that are violating human rights law. And this is where I am deeply disappointed with what's happening in the US, because there was a UN resolution put at the Security Council that called for a humanitarian pause in the Israel Hamas war. And the only country that vetoed this was again the United States. And here's the excuse. The ambassador said the draft resolution did not do enough to underscore Israel's right to self defense. Well, from my understanding of the United Nations, that is why it is called a draft resolution, meaning you can then add to it to make sure that that resolution also supports what it is that you want it to support. But that was not done. So instead of actually working on a draft that could work, they just dropped it. And this is what supposedly leader of the free world or country leading the free world has done. And that tells you a lot about what is happening. So, I can go into a deeper position on how all of this actually comes through, all of this actually comes through a particular configuration of power that came with the nation state. And you know what? That's political theory. So let's get into the actual situation of, we've seen a little bit about the Israeli side and why it is not roses and peaches and why it is okay to actually call out BS. Okay? But now let's look at Gaza. And here's where I know I'm going to lose some of you. Now, what I want to really bring to the audience here is to stop looking at your emotions and to start looking at facts. Palestine, in and of itself, was a territory that derived from Philistia. And that was the name given by Greek writers to the land of the Philistines, who in the 12th century occupied a small pocket of land on the southern coast between modern Tel Aviv and Gaza. And during the second millennium BCE, it was inhabited by Canaanites, Semitic-speaking peoples who practiced the Canaanite religion. The Israelites emerged later as a separate ethno-religious group in the region. So far, so good. But here's the problem. In the early part of the 20th century, this land, what's called Palestine right now, and the surrounding areas was settled by Arabs, a mixture of Arabs and Jews and Christians. It was already settled ground. But due to a wide variety of factors, the League of Nations decides that it would create a separate state for Jewish settlers. And therein is where the entire problem started in its configuration. So this came through a particular declaration called the Balfour Declaration. And it was basically Britain's promise that this Jewish homeland would be created. But the way they did it was to push people out of lands that they had been occupying because they had been there for generations. And as they pushed people out of their lands, they also brought in waves of Jewish immigrants who had settled in Europe and other places. So is it the fault of the people who were living there for all this time? No, it's not. Is it the fault of the people who came in? No, it's not. It's the fault of the people who decided that they could carve up territory on a map, play God, and decide who goes where in a very unnatural reorganization of people and territory. And this is what happened. And to be honest, this is what the British have done across the world. So if there was a finger of 100% blame, I'm pointing it at the colonials. So they did the same thing. They pushed people into a land that, not to say it wasn't their land, we'll get to that point, but they pushed them in such a way that displaced the indigenous populations and created this vast disparity of power. Because what happened was they gave them the status of the nation state, and the people they displaced did not get the same status. As they did not have the same status, they did not have the same power to negotiate. That was the root of it. This was a political issue from day one, and one that the Israelis who actually went there did not cause, and one that the Palestinians who got ousted did not cause. I tried watching the interview with the current British Prime Minister, and let us just say I was not surprised. I was not at all surprised by the lack of any of any culpability that for what this regime caused. Having said that, now herein lies another problem. So in the early parts of the 20th century, these wars are going on because these people are being forced out of their homes and forced off their land. And here I'm quoting from an article called Demography and the Struggle for Palestine, 1917 to 1947, by Aviva Halamish in a journal called Israel Studies. During the Mandate period, the struggle for Palestine was essentially a demographic race between the Jewish minority and the Arab majority, with the Mandate authorities determining the rules of the game. While the proportion of Arabs to Jews at the end of World War I was 11 to 1, by the eve of World War II, it was approximately two-thirds Arabs to one-third Jews. And as such, until the outbreak of the 1948 war, with 600,000 Jews in the country and twice as many Arabs. The primary source of growth in the Jewish population was immigration, whereas the rate of growth among the Arabs was almost due to exclusively natural population increase. So you can see where this modern day conflict originated. Now you got to understand that the people who came in were already traumatized, they were already scapegoated, they were trying to find security, and they were already being persecuted in different ways. It wasn't just Hitler who hated the Jews. That sentiment was widely spread. And there were sterilization camps in places outside of Nazi Germany as well. Let's not forget there were also Russian pogroms and pogroms in different parts of Europe. So you already had a very traumatized bunch of people coming there into a cultural clash, which was a political clash and a clash for land. And the result that it has created through this initial conflict is completely unsurprising. But it makes that finger of blame a lot less easy. You can't just look at it as saying black and white, this people bad, that people good. How would you feel if somebody came and ousted you out of your home? And here we go, I'm back. But people want you to think that it's simple, that's good money and good politics for someone somewhere. And that's why I say take a balanced view. It's not pretty, it's messy, but it's worth it. And here's something else that I found when I was trying to figure out, okay, who are these guys? Are they Muslim? What are they? Where did they come from? If they're Muslim, why are they fighting to be on this holy land? They got a different holy land. But the more I looked into it, I found a very, very important document. A document that was so powerful that it got suppressed as best as it could in 2001. And this was a document called The Origins of Palestinians and Their Genetic Relatedness with Other Mediterranean Populations. It was, the lead author was A. Arnaiz Villena, who is a geneticist from Spain. So in it, and this was not done with any political funding at all. This was not done with any great, agenda behind it. I read the actual paper. The man was not making any such claims. But they found that genetically, Palestinians and Israelis are almost identical. So literally, when you look at it from that perspective, it's brother killing brother, it's sister killing sister, it's cousin killing cousin, it's family killing family. So, and of course, that does go back to the roots of Judaism as well. Brother killing brother is pretty much there. And here is the interesting thing. The journal that they published it in, called Human Immunology, it had no issue with the article. It was accepted for publication. But when people read it, they realized what were the implications of the paper. So the research paper was pulled from the journal, and academics who had already received copies were urged to rip out the offending pages and throw them away. And here I'm quoting from The Guardian: such a drastic act of self censorship is unprecedented in research publishing and has created a widespread disquiet, generating fears that it may involve the suppression of scientific work that questions biblical dogma. And the lead author, is someone who's written hundreds of papers, and he's just like, I have never seen this happen. I have never seen this happen. And so the paper was pulled, but it is available online, and I did download it and I did read it, and there was no such political agenda. His biggest conclusion was that the conflict was not really motivated by being a separate peoples. It was motivated by differences in culture and religion, but fundamentally they are the same at a genetic level. And that is a truth that was so powerful. They felt the need to do this in 2001. And the president of the American Society of Histocompatibility and Immunogenetics, which runs the journal, told subscribers that the society is offended and embarrassed. That tells you how much blindness and denial is operating at different levels of American politics, to its intelligentsia, to anyone who wants you to believe this very clear-cut narrative of black and white, when they are cousin and cousin. Literally, the children dying on both sides come from the same root. And that is why I don't want to support either team here. Support the safety of the children, because they're from the same stock. That's not the only reason to support them, but it becomes even more ironic when you realize. So what has happened here? The people that they have othered, calling them Muslim, I mean, they are Muslims, there's nothing wrong with being Muslim, but they have been othered, they have been shown as the enemy, they have been portrayed unilaterally terrorists, but they're their long lost cousins. Maybe not that long lost, because, we're not talking about tens of thousands of years, but they are their long lost cousins. And by perpetuating this violence, they are creating trauma in all branches of that genetic tree and that genetic line, which branched off and embraced different religions. But one thing a person has to remember is that they all started with the same root, worshipping Canaanite idols. Then they went to Judaism, and one part of those Jews went and immigrated, and the rest of them converted to Islam only in the 7th century. So for thousands of years, they were essentially the same peoples. So when you think about that, that is, to me at the very least, when I read this paper and I saw the reaction to it, I realized, shit, they want to cover this up. Because, and this was a very interesting reasoning why. So the person who wrote this was, he was very factual. He just said rivalry between the two races is not genetically separate, it's cultural and religious reasons. And that's it. That's all he wrote. It wasn't anything terrible, it wasn't anything horrible, but herein lies the real challenge that paper presented. It presented the idea that the Jews were not this special race who had privileged access to God, and that Judaism was something that could actually be found in different peoples, or the absence of Judaism could be found in peoples who otherwise would be ethnically marked as Jews. So that equivalence that has given so much of power and so much of transferability between an ethnic identity and a religion could then be challenged. And that's the basis of how people are, spinning the whole anti-Semitism thing. If you say anything against the Jew, you're anti-Semitic. It's the same false equivalence. So this paper gave people the platform to challenge that, even though the original author writing this was going, why do you have such a problem with this? This is just the fact. So that's the suppressed genetic research I mentioned in the title. So when you look at all of this together, it becomes a terrible family tragedy. It's not us versus them, or rather, it's not them versus them, it's family member versus family member. So, why did I call this piece olive tree diplomacy? Well, I wasn't being tongue in cheek, but one of the things when you actually look at the suffering of the people of Gaza, not all of whom are terrorists. If anyone tells you that, they have something wrong with their brain. You just look at the videos. You just look at the videos of people fleeing, hugging their fur babies, hugging their human babies. You see blood all over the place. That that is real. No one's of course, there are going to be some militants, and those people should be stopped because no one should be killing children. Full stop. No one should be doing that. Everyone with any power should be creating safe passageways for people to, for children to be kept safe. If you've got power, do that. Don't be putting white phosphorus on babies and people that will scar them for life. But as I've already mentioned that earlier, there is an excessive use of force that is disproportional against the civilian population. And that is something that honestly needs to be looked at very closely once all of this is done. But why the olive tree? So one of the things that came up, especially when you look at images of Palestinians who are crying, and who are really expressing grief and anguish. And a lot of the time, you don't really get the pictures of people who are necessarily in the heat of battle and war. One, they don't necessarily have the internet to show it to you live. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Water is scarce, electricity is scarce. But one of the enduring symbols of this oppression and the struggle is shown through what the relationship with the olive tree. The relationship with the olive tree. So if you look at the Palestinians, they weep over olive trees that have been uprooted. Because for them, it is a symbol of the fact that they have always been on that land. That is their land. And so they see their identity as rooted into that land, much as the olive tree is rooted into that land. And which is why Palestinian olive oil, is one source I read, is effectively one of the most political foods in the world because it is a symbol of perseverance, because it is a symbol of rootedness and groundedness. And it supports 800,000 families, which is like just about half, a little under half of that population. So, what Israel has been doing as a state, it has illegally uprooted almost exactly the same number of those olive trees in the past few years because they know it's a symbol of the Palestinian resistance, just the identity. It has nothing to do with terrorism. It is about cultural identity. They have knowingly uprooted those trees. They have forced Palestinians to watch their trees being uprooted. And it is a terrible desecration for them. And they knew the impact, which is why they got them to watch the trees being uprooted. That is cruelty of a different nature. And this has also been happening at the same time. Not only do they want to economically castrate them, but they also want to sever their ties with the land. How's that just? How is that just? For people who have been living there the whole time. That's not just, is it? And the irony is that the olive tree is the national symbol of Israel. And cousin versus cousin, brother versus brother, sister versus sister, every tree they uproot, they take out part of themselves. And this is what media and politics blinds people to. Every tree they uproot, they think they're erasing the Palestinians, but they are erasing themselves. And they are turning into what oppressed them. And that is a cycle of trauma, abuse, and violence. And now you see that it's being taken place with the same ethnic group, but which has been divided along religious lines at this time. So those olive trees, rather than uprooting them, why not extend an olive branch? Why not seek peace rather than perpetuating even more conflict? Because if this continues, and if they do what they want to do with the massive ground invasion, you're just going to create far more hardliners on both sides. And that bloodshed and that conflict is not going to stop. From a spiritual perspective, the only cure for this is to recognize how we are one. And in the case of Palestinians and Jews, to recognize that they come from that same source, not just metaphysically, but also literally, biologically. They were separated by fate and history, but they came from the same source. They have to recognize that the symbol of that tree is something that unites them rather than divides them. And that's not something that we as outsiders can do. But what we can do is that we can challenge people who take that very easy view of Muslim terrorist evil, kill, it's okay if they die. That we can challenge that view. We can say, hey, now, look at the balance between the two. Look at who started it. Look at how both sides are traumatized and look at how they are connected. Why are you perpetuating this narrative of division? That is what we can do. Obviously, we can pray for peace, but it is more important to embody that peace in perspective. And remember, peace cannot exist without justice. Everyone who has used arms in this conflict against another, especially the innocent, must be held to account, irrespective of their ethnicity or religion, however you want to define it. But this is, I would say, my perspective on all of this stuff. And it is a research perspective. It's not a perspective that just comes, out of nowhere. And it is something that's also evolved in me over years because, as I said, I have a deep love and a connection to different aspects of the Jewish faith. So, my biases were initially in the opposite direction. But coming to that middle point, I feel is truthfully the best way to be. If we were to look at all of these Abrahamic faiths, all of these monotheistic faiths, they have a core commonality. Each wants to find God, however you define God. But in each holy book, they talk about peace. At the end of the day, they talk about peace, they talk about faith, they talk about forgiveness. And this is the time for people who, if they're using religion as a trump card, if they're using religion as a justification for doing whatever, then you need to see actual religious and spiritual people of faith standing there and saying, no, this is not what we stand for. You can find it in Judaism, you can find it in Islam, you can find it in Christianity. Every one of them talks about faith and forgiveness, and anyone who claims otherwise has strayed from those teachings. So to find olive tree diplomacy, look at the roots, look at the tree, look at the fruits, look at the land it stands on, look who claims ownership of that land, and look at the hands that have tended to those trees for generations and what has happened to those hands. Without a complete perspective, we cannot take a view that is going to be of use to anyone. And by no means do I claim that this video is comprehensive, but I know it has points of views that are not covered in other places. So having said that, that is the best that I can do on this topic. And I have tried to do this video several times, but it turned out it just had to be alive. So here it is. And I hope that all of us can do our part in creating a world that is safer for all children. Because otherwise, what the heck are we here for? And that's about it. Take care. Very many blessings. Lots of love to all of you. Ciao, ciao for now.